They said I wasn't qualified, then they called my name for the award. The ballroom of the Marriott Grand was filled with the soft murmur of 300 industry professionals, all dressed in their finest evening wear. All pretending that the annual Excellence in Innovation Awards ceremony was about celebrating achievement rather than reinforcing the established hierarchy of who mattered and who didn't. I sat at table 12, strategically positioned far enough from the stage that the message was clear. I was here as a courtesy, not as a contender. My black dress was elegant, but modest, purchased from a department store rather than a designer boutique. Appropriate for someone who was expected to applaud others' success rather than claim any of her own. "Maya," whispered Sarah Chen, my colleague from the biotech division, "you look nervous." "I'm fine," I replied, though my hands were trembling slightly as I reached for my water glass. "Just tired. It's been a long week." It had been more than a long week. It had been a long year of having my research questioned, my methodologies criticized, and my conclusions dismissed by colleagues who seemed to believe that innovation was the exclusive domain of people who looked and sounded like them. Dr. Richard Blackwood, the head of our research division, sat 3 tables away, surrounded by his usual circle of admirers. He was holding court as always, his voice carrying across the room as he explained some complex theoretical concept to an audience that hung on his every word. 6 months ago, Richard had been the one to tell me I wasn't qualified for the Innovation Excellence Award, despite the fact that my research on targeted gene therapy had resulted in 3 breakthrough patents and a treatment protocol that was already saving lives. "Maya," he'd said in his office, his tone patient but condescending, "you're a talented researcher, but this award recognizes lifetime achievement in innovation. You've been with the company for only 4 years. You need more experience, more publications, more gravitas. Gravitas." The word had stuck with me for months, a polite way of saying that a 32-year-old woman of Indian descent who'd grown up in a working-class family didn't have the right pedigree for recognition among the industry elite. Besides, Richard had continued, "Your work, while promising, is still largely theoretical. The award committee prefers to recognize innovations that have demonstrated clear commercial impact." The irony was that my theoretical work had generated more revenue for the NCH company in the past year than any other research project. But somehow, success wasn't enough to qualify me for recognition of success. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced from the podium, "welcome to the 25th Annual Excellence in Innovation Awards. Tonight, we celebrate the brilliant minds who are shaping the future of biotechnology." I applauded politely as the first award was presented, Outstanding Research Team, to a group from our competitor, Meridian Biotech. The winners looked exactly like what I'd expected. 5 middle-aged white men in expensive suits, accepting recognition for work that had been largely conducted by graduate students and junior researchers, whose names would never appear on the award. "The next award," the host continued, "recognizes breakthrough innovation in therapeutic development. This year's nominees represent the cutting edge of medical research, with innovations that promise to transform patient care for generations to come." My heart rate increased, despite my efforts to remain calm. My gene therapy research was nominated in this category, though Richard had made it clear that my nomination was more about encouraging young talent than any realistic expectation of winning. "The nominees are," the host read from his card, "Dr. James Morrison from Genesis Therapeutics, for his work on cardiac regeneration protocols. Dr. Susan Walsh from BioAdvance Corporation, for her development of targeted cancer immunotherapies. Dr. Maya Patel from Innovative Biologics, for her breakthrough research in precision gene therapy delivery systems." Polite applause filled the room as each nominee was acknowledged. I smiled and waved briefly, playing the role of the grateful young researcher who was honored just to be nominated. "And the winner is ... The host paused dramatically, opening the envelope with theatrical flair. "Dr. Maya Patel, for her revolutionary work in precision gene therapy that has already begun saving lives and promises to transform treatment for genetic disorders." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I was certain I'd misheard. That the host had made a mistake, that someone would correct the error before I had to face the humiliation of walking to the stage under false pretenses. But the applause was real, and it was growing louder. Sarah was grabbing my arm, her face bright with excitement. "Maya, you won. You actually won." I stood on unsteady legs, my mind reeling as I tried to process what was happening. Around me, the audience was rising to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. I could see Richard Blackwood at his table, his face a mask of professional composure that barely concealed his shock. The walk to the stage felt like it took hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. With each step, I could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on me. Some celebrating, some calculating, some probably wondering if there had been some kind of mistake. "Dr. Patel," the host said as I reached the podium, "congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. Your research has been described by the award committee as groundbreaking work that represents the future of personalized medicine. How does it feel to receive this honor?" I looked out at the audience, at the sea of faces that represented the industry I'd been fighting to find my place in for 4 years. In the front row, I could see the award committee members, distinguished researchers, and industry leaders who had somehow decided that my work was worthy of the highest recognition in our field. "It feels surreal," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 6 months ago, I was told that I wasn't qualified for this award. That my work was too theoretical, too new, too unproven. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the typical gracious acceptance speech they were expecting. But here's the thing about innovation. I continued, gaining confidence as I spoke. It's not about having the right credentials or the right connections or the right pedigree. It's about having the courage to pursue ideas that others dismiss. To persist when others doubt. To believe in the value of your work, even when no one else does. The applause was building again, but it felt different now, more genuine, more engaged. "This award isn't just recognition of my research," I said, holding up the crystal trophy. "It's proof that excellence comes in many forms, from many backgrounds, and that the future of our industry depends on embracing talent wherever we find it, not just where we expect it." As I walked back to my table, the standing ovation resumed, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about the phone call I would make to my parents tonight. About the little girl who'd grown up in a cramped apartment above her family's convenience store, dreaming of becoming a scientist, while her classmates told her that people like her didn't belong in laboratories. I was thinking about all the young researchers who would see this moment and realize that their dreams weren't too big. Their backgrounds weren't too humble, their voices weren't too quiet to be heard. But most of all, I was thinking about Richard Blackwood's face when my name was called, and the conversation we would inevitably have tomorrow morning about what it meant to be qualified for recognition in an industry that was finally learning to see beyond its own assumptions. They had said I wasn't qualified. Tonight, the most respected voices in our field had said otherwise. The reception following the awards ceremony was a carefully choreographed dance of congratulations, networking, and barely concealed recalibration of professional hierarchies. I stood near the bar, still clutching my award. As a steady stream of colleagues approached to offer their congratulations, some genuine, others clearly motivated by the sudden realization that they'd underestimated someone who was now officially recognized as a leader in the field. "Maya, congratulations." Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the awards committee approached with a warm smile. "I have to tell you, your research presentation to the committee was extraordinary. The practical applications of your gene therapy delivery system are already showing remarkable results in clinical trials." "Thank you, Dr. Walsh. I appreciate the committee's recognition. Between you and me," she said, lowering her voice, "your work received unanimous support from the committee. It wasn't even a close decision. Your innovation is exactly the kind of breakthrough we created this award to recognize." I felt a surge of validation mixed with anger. If my work had been so clearly deserving of recognition, why had Richard been so confident that I wouldn't win? Why had he been so dismissive of my qualifications? Dr. Patel, the young woman, approached hesitantly, her badge identifying her as a graduate student from the local university. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you for what you said in your speech. About innovation coming from unexpected places. I'm a first-generation college student, and sometimes I feel like I don't belong in research science. You belong wherever your curiosity and dedication take you, I replied, remembering my own struggles with imposter syndrome. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As the graduate student walked away, I noticed Richard Blackwood approaching, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language tense. Maya, he said, extending his hand in a gesture that felt more obligatory than celebratory. Congratulations on your award, well deserved. Thank you, Richard. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised you think so, given our conversation 6 months ago. Richard's smile faltered slightly. Maya, I hope you understand that my role requires me to be realistic about award prospects. I was simply trying to manage expectations. Were you trying to manage something else? I'm not sure what you mean. I looked around the reception, noting how many people were watching our conversation with obvious interest. Richard's dismissal of my qualifications had been widely known in our department, and my unexpected victory had clearly caught many people off guard. Richard, can I ask you something? When you told me I wasn't qualified for this award, had you actually reviewed my research in detail? Of course I had. Had you read my clinical trial results, the patient outcome data, the peer review feedback from the Journal of Gene Therapy? Richard's pause was telling. Maya, I don't think this is the appropriate venue because if you had read those materials, I continued, you would have known that my theoretical work had already been successfully applied in treating 12 patients with previously incurable genetic disorders. You would have known that 3 major pharmaceutical companies were bidding for licensing rights to my delivery system. Maya, please, you would have known that the work you dismissed as promising but unproven had generated over $15 million in revenue for our company in the past year alone. The conversations around us had quieted, and I realized that our exchange was drawing attention from colleagues who were probably wondering why the eThings Award winner was having such an intense discussion with her department head. Richard, I said, lowering my voice, I need to understand something. When you told me I wasn't qualified, were you basing that assessment on my work or on your assumptions about who deserves recognition in this field? That's an unfair characterization, is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you dismissed the most successful research project in our department's history, because it was conducted by someone who didn't fit your image of what an award-winning scientist looks like. Richard's face flushed red. Maya, you're being completely unreasonable. I've always supported your work, have you? Because I have emails where you questioned my methodologies without basis. I have meeting notes where you suggested that my research was too ambitious for someone at my level. I have documentation of you excluding me from conference presentations where my own work was being discussed. Those decisions were based on what Richard knew the quality of my science. Because tonight, the most respected experts in our field unanimously agreed that my science is exceptional. Dr. Walsh, who had been standing nearby and clearly overhearing our conversation, approached with a diplomatic smile. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said. But Maya, I wanted to mention that the committee was particularly impressed by the rigor of your research methodology. Your approach to delivery system optimization was described as textbook perfect by our peer reviewers. Richard's expression grew more strained. That's wonderful to hear. In fact, Dr. Walsh continued, we were surprised that your department hadn't submitted your work for consideration in previous years. Research of this caliber typically gets nominated immediately upon publication. I looked at Richard, waiting for his explanation. We both knew that department heads were responsible for identifying and nominating their most promising research for industry recognition. Well, Richard said carefully, we wanted to ensure that Maya's work had sufficient time to demonstrate its impact before seeking recognition. Interesting approach. Dr. Walsh replied, her tone suggesting she found it anything but interesting. Most departments prefer to showcase their breakthrough research as quickly as possible. It's good for institutional reputation and researcher morale. After Dr. Walsh moved on to other conversations, Richard and I stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Maya, he said finally, I think we should schedule a meeting next week to discuss your research trajectory going forward. My research trajectory? With this recognition, you'll have new opportunities, new responsibilities. We should talk about how to leverage this award for maximum benefit. I almost laughed. 6 months ago, Richard had been telling me I wasn't ready for recognition. Now that I'd received the highest honor in our field, he wanted to discuss how to leverage my success. Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I think I'm quite capable of managing my own career trajectory, of course, but with my experience, your experience in recognizing breakthrough research, because based on tonight's results, I'm not sure that's an area where you excel. Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on forced professionalism. Maya, I hope you won't let this success go to your head. Awards are wonderful, but they don't change the fundamental requirements of scientific research. You're absolutely right, I replied. Awards don't change the requirements of good science. But they do change people's perceptions of who's capable of doing good science. And sometimes, Richard, that's just as important. I excused myself and walked toward the exit, my award tucked under my arm and my mind racing with the implications of the evening's events. The recognition was gratifying, but the real revelation was how quickly people's attitudes had shifted once my work received external validation. In the hotel lobby, I called my parents to share the news. My mother cried when I told her about the award, remembering all the nights she'd found me studying at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks that cost more than our family spent on groceries in a month. Beta, she said, using the Hindi term of endearment that always made me feel like I was still her little girl. We always knew you were special. Now everyone else knows too. But as I hung up the phone and headed home, I realized that the real victory wasn't the award itself. It was the knowledge that I'd persisted in pursuing excellence despite being told I wasn't qualified. That I'd trusted my own assessment of my work's value even when others dismissed it. Tomorrow, I would return to the laboratory where Richard had spent months undermining my confidence. But I would return as an award-winning scientist whose work had been unanimously recognized by her peers. The conversation about qualifications was far from over. But now, at least, I had the credentials to ensure it would be a very different kind of conversation. 3 days after the awards ceremony, I was in my laboratory reviewing the latest clinical trial data when my research assistant, Kevin, knocked on my office door with an expression that suggested he had news I needed to hear. Dr. Patel, there's something you should know about. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but after what happened at the awards ceremony. What is it, Kevin? He closed the door behind him and sat down across from my desk, his usual easy confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. It's about Dr. Blackwood and your award nomination. I overheard something a few months ago that I think you should know about. I set down my tablet and gave Kevin my full attention. What kind of something? I was working late in the lab around the time when award nominations were due. Dr. Blackwood was in his office with Dr. Morrison from Genesis Therapeutics, you know, the guy who was nominated in your category. I know James Morrison. What about him? They were talking about the Innovation Excellence Awards, and I heard Dr. Blackwood say that he wasn't planning to submit your research for consideration. He said something about it being premature, and that the committee would be more receptive to established researchers with proven track records. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest. Kevin, are you saying that Richard initially decided not to nominate my work at all? That's what it sounded like. But then Dr. Morrison said something that made me really uncomfortable. What did he say? Kevin shifted in his chair, clearly reluctant to continue. He said that excluding your work might look suspicious, given how successful your clinical trials had been. He suggested that Dr. Blackwood should submit your nomination, but frame it appropriately so the committee would understand that you were still developing as a researcher. Frame it appropriately. Dr. Morrison said something about emphasizing your limited experience and suggesting that while your work showed promise, it needed more validation before it could be considered truly groundbreaking. I stared at Kevin, processing what he was telling me. Richard hadn't just dismissed my qualifications, he'd actively worked to undermine my nomination, even while submitting it. Kevin, did you hear anything else? Dr. Blackwood mentioned that he'd spoken to some committee members informally to give them context about the nominees from our institution. He said it was important to manage expectations about young researchers who might not be ready for major recognition. The pieces were falling into place. Richard had submitted my nomination because excluding it entirely would have been too obvious. But he'd simultaneously worked to ensure that the committee would view my work through the lens of inexperience rather than achievement. Kevin, why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I wasn't sure what I'd heard, and I didn't want to cause problems for you with Dr. Blackwood. But after you won the award, and after what people are saying about how surprised everyone was, what are people saying? That Dr. Blackwood had been telling colleagues for months that your nomination was more about encouraging diversity than recognizing genuine innovation. That he'd been suggesting your work wasn't really award caliber. I felt a surge of rage that I struggled to control. Richard hadn't just doubted my qualifications, he'd actively campaigned against my recognition while maintaining the pretense of supporting my career. Kevin, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Have you heard Dr. Blackwood make similar comments about other researchers, particularly women or minorities? Kevin's expression grew even more uncomfortable. Dr. Patel, I don't want to spread gossip. This isn't gossip. Kevin, this is about a pattern of behavior that could be affecting multiple careers. Well, there was Dr. Sarah Kim last year. Her work on protein synthesis was really innovative, but Dr. Blackwood kept saying she needed more seasoning before she could be considered for major projects. And Dr. Rodriguez from the immunology division, Dr. Blackwood questioned whether his research was rigorous enough for publication in top-tier journals. And what happened to their careers? Dr. Kim left for a position at Stanford. Dr. Rodriguez transferred to another department. Both of them said they felt like their work wasn't being valued here. I was beginning to see a pattern that went far beyond my own experience. Richard wasn't just dismissive of my qualifications, he seemed to have a systematic approach to undermining researchers who didn't fit his image of what a successful scientist looked like. Kevin, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be discreet about it. What do you need? I need you to help me document this pattern. I want to know how many promising researchers have left our department in the past 3 years, and I want to understand what role Dr. Blackwood played in their decisions to leave. Dr. Patel, are you sure about this? Dr. Blackwood has a lot of influence in the department. Kevin, I just won the most prestigious award in our field for work that my department head told colleagues wasn't award caliber. I think it's time to examine whether his judgment about researcher qualifications is as reliable as people assume. Over the next week, Kevin and I conducted a careful investigation into the department's recent history. What we discovered was disturbing. In the past 3 years, 7 promising researchers had left the department. And in each case, Richard had been vocal about their limitations or lack of readiness for advancement. More troubling, we found evidence that Richard had been actively discouraging these researchers from pursuing opportunities that might have advanced their careers. Grant applications that weren't submitted, conference presentations that were reassigned to more experienced researchers, collaborations that were quietly discouraged. The pattern was clear. Richard was systematically undermining researchers who threatened his position as the department's primary source of innovation and recognition. Dr. Patel, Kevin said as we reviewed our findings, this is bigger than just your award nomination. Dr. Blackwood has been sabotaging careers for years. The question is, what do we do about it? Have you considered talking to Dr. Walsh from the awards committee? She seemed really supportive of your work. I thought about Dr. Walsh's comments at the reception, her surprise that my work hadn't been nominated in previous years, her obvious respect for the rigor of my research. Kevin, what if Dr. Walsh wasn't just being polite when she said the committee was surprised by the timing of my nomination? What if she was hinting that they'd expected to see my work much earlier? You think the committee knew that Dr. Blackwood had been holding back your nomination? I think the committee might be more aware of departmental politics than we realize. And I think Dr. Walsh might be interested in understanding why so many talented researchers have been leaving our department. That afternoon, I called Dr. Walsh and asked if she'd be willing to meet for coffee to discuss some concerns about research development in our department. She agreed immediately, which suggested that my suspicions about her awareness of the situation might be correct. "Maya," she said, when we met the next day, "I'm glad you called. I've been hoping to have a conversation with you about some patterns we've noticed in nominations from your department." "What kind of patterns?" "Well, for the past 3 years, your department has submitted very few nominations for major awards, despite having some of the most innovative research in the field. We've been wondering if there might be some internal barriers to recognizing excellence." "Dr. Walsh, what would you say if I told you that several award-worthy researchers have left our department in recent years, and that in each case, they were discouraged from pursuing recognition for their work?" Dr. Walsh's expression grew serious. "I'd say that sounds like a systemic problem that needs to be addressed." "Maya, are you suggesting that there's been deliberate suppression of research recognition in your department?" "I'm suggesting that someone with significant influence has been consistently undervaluing work that doesn't fit their personal definition of excellence." "And you have evidence of this?" I pulled out the file Kevin and I had compiled, filled with documentation of missed opportunities, discouraged applications, and talented researchers who'd been driven away from what should have been a supportive environment. "Dr. Walsh, I think it's time for the awards committee to understand why they've been seeing so few nominations from one of the most productive research departments in the field." As Dr. Walsh reviewed our findings, her expression grew increasingly troubled. What we'd uncovered wasn't just about my own experience. It was about a systematic suppression of talent that had been damaging careers and limiting innovation for years. The conversation about qualifications was about to become much larger than Richard Blackwood had ever imagined. 2 weeks after my meeting with Dr. Walsh, I received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire careers. "Dr. Patel, this is Dr. Margaret Chen, Dean of Research at the university. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding research recognition practices in your department." My heart rate increased. "Of course, Dean Chen. When would be convenient?" "This afternoon, if possible." "And Dr. Patel, I'd like you to bring any documentation you might have regarding nomination processes and career development practices in your department." The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the dean's office, a imposing space lined with awards, honorary degrees, and photographs of distinguished faculty members. Dean Chen was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every form of academic politics imaginable. "Dr. Patel," she began, "congratulations on your recent award. Your research is exactly the kind of innovation our university should be celebrating." "Thank you, Dean Chen. However, I've received some troubling information about the circumstances surrounding your nomination. Dr. Walsh, from the awards committee, has shared some concerns about patterns she's observed in submissions from your department." I pulled out the file Kevin and I had compiled, setting it on her desk. "Dean Chen, I believe those patterns reflect a systematic problem with how research excellence is recognized and supported in our department." Dean Chen opened the file and began reviewing the documentation we'd gathered. Her expression grew increasingly serious as she read through the evidence of missed opportunities, discouraged nominations, and talented researchers who'd been driven away. "Dr. Patel, this suggests that Dr. Blackwood has been actively discouraging award nominations and career advancement for multiple researchers. Do you have any insight into his motivations? I believe Dr. Blackwood sees recognition of other researchers as a threat to his own position as the department's primary source of innovation. By limiting opportunities for others, he maintains his status as the most celebrated scientist in our division. That's a serious allegation. It's a serious problem. Dean Chen. In the past 3 years, we've lost 7 promising researchers who left citing lack of support for their career development. Meanwhile, Dr. Blackwood has received multiple awards and recognition for work that was largely conducted by the same researchers he discouraged from seeking their own recognition. Dean Chen was quiet for several minutes, reading through case studies of researchers who'd been systematically undermined. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. Dr. Patel, I'm going to ask you to participate in a formal investigation into these allegations. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that will involve? I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to ensure that talented researchers are supported rather than suppressed. Good, because I'm also going to ask you to consider taking on additional responsibilities. We need someone to lead a comprehensive review of recognition and advancement practices across all our research departments. The scope of what Dean Chen was proposing began to sink in. This wasn't just about my own experience or even Richard's behavior. It was about examining systemic problems that might be affecting researchers throughout the university. Dean Chen, are you suggesting that this problem extends beyond our department? I'm suggesting that your experience may have revealed issues that we need to address institution-wide. Dr. Patel, would you be interested in serving as Director of Research Excellence and Recognition? It would be a new position, focused on ensuring that all our researchers have equal opportunities. For career advancement and external recognition, the offer was both thrilling and daunting. It would mean leaving my laboratory work to focus on administrative responsibilities. But it would also mean having the authority to prevent what had happened to me from happening to others. I'm very interested, but I'd want to maintain some research activities. My clinical trials are at a critical stage. Of course, we'd structure the position to allow you to continue your research while taking on these new responsibilities. Dr. Patel, your experience gives you unique insight into how recognition systems can be manipulated and how to prevent that manipulation. That evening, I called Kevin to share the news about the investigation and the job offer. His reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Dr. Patel, this is incredible. You're going to be able to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Kevin, I want you to know that your willingness to speak up about what you'd observed was crucial to exposing this problem. It took courage to come forward. It took courage for you to pursue it. Dr. Patel, can I ask you something? Are you nervous about confronting Dr. Blackwood directly? I thought about the question. Tomorrow, Dean Chen would be meeting with Richard to discuss the allegations against him. He would learn that his years of undermining colleagues had been documented and exposed. I'm not nervous about confronting him, Kevin. I'm looking forward to it. The next morning, I was in my laboratory when Richard appeared in my doorway, his face flushed with anger and his usual composure completely absent. Maya, we need to talk. Now, of course. Richard, please, come in. He closed the door behind him and turned to face me with an expression of barely controlled rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? Filing complaints with the dean, making accusations about my professional conduct. I'm documenting a pattern of behavior that has damaged multiple careers and limited innovation in our department. You're destroying my reputation based on speculation and gossip. I'm exposing your reputation based on evidence and documentation. Richard, did you or did you not tell colleagues that my award nomination was more about encouraging diversity than recognizing genuine innovation? That's taken completely out of context. Did you or did not discourage Dr. Kim, Dr. Rodriguez, and others from pursuing recognition for their research? I provided realistic assessments of their readiness for major recognition. Richard, stop. My voice was calm, but firm. We both know what you've been doing. The question is whether you're going to continue denying it or start taking responsibility for the damage you've caused. Richard stared at me for a moment, probably realizing that his usual tactics of intimidation and dismissal weren't going to work with someone who'd just been recognized as a leader in the field. Maya, you don't understand the pressures of managing a research department. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made about resource allocation and recognition opportunities. You're right, Richard. I don't understand how someone could systematically undermine talented colleagues to protect their own ego. I don't understand how someone could discourage innovation to maintain their own position as the department's primary innovator. That's not what I was doing then. Explain to me why 7 promising researchers have left our department in 3 years. Explain why my award-winning research was described to colleagues as not really award caliber. Explain why you told the awards committee that I needed more seasoning before it could be considered for major recognition. Richard's face went pale. How do you know about my conversations with the committee? Because people talk, Richard. Because your attempts to undermine my nomination were noticed by committee members who couldn't understand why you were discouraging recognition of breakthrough research. Maya, listen to me. I've always supported your work. No, Richard. You've always taken credit for my work. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to my filing cabinet, pulling out a folder I'd been saving for this conversation. These are emails where you questioned my methodologies without scientific basis. These are meeting notes where you suggested my research was too ambitious. These are conference programs where my work was presented by other researchers because you deemed me not ready for major presentations. Richard looked at the documentation with the expression of someone watching his career crumble in real time. Maya, what do you want from me? I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. That undermining colleagues doesn't make you more successful, it makes you a barrier to success. And what happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. Dean Chen is conducting a formal investigation. The awards committee is reviewing nomination practices across all departments. And I'm going to make sure that future researchers don't have to overcome the kind of systematic discouragement that you've been practicing for years. Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed from anger to something that might have been defeat. Maya, I never intended to damage anyone's career. I was just trying to maintain standards. To ensure that recognition went to researchers who were truly ready for it. Richard, who made you the arbiter of who's ready for recognition, who gave you the authority to decide that your definition of excellence was the only one that mattered. I have 20 years of experience in this field, and I have research that's already saving lives. Experience doesn't give you the right to suppress innovation, Richard. It gives you the responsibility to nurture it. After Richard left my office, I sat alone for several minutes, processing the conversation and the larger implications of what was happening. Tomorrow, I would begin my new role as Director of Research, Excellence, and Recognition. I would have the authority to ensure that talent was recognized regardless of the politics or prejudices of department heads. But more than that, I would have the opportunity to create a system where researchers were judged by the quality of their work rather than their willingness to conform to someone else's expectations. Richard had told me I wasn't qualified for recognition. The most respected experts in our field had disagreed. Now it was time to make sure that future researchers wouldn't have to overcome the same barriers I'd faced. The conversation about qualifications was far from over. But now, at least, it would be a conversation where all voices could be heard. 6 months later, I stood before a packed auditorium at the annual University Research Symposium, delivering the keynote address on recognizing excellence, building inclusive systems for research recognition. The audience included faculty members, graduate students, and administrators from across the university system, all gathered to discuss the changes that had been implemented since the investigation into departmental recognition practices. When I received the Innovation Excellence Award last year, I thought the most important part of that evening was the recognition of my research. But I've learned that the most important part was what happened afterward, the conversation about who gets recognized, how recognition decisions are made, and what barriers exist to identifying and celebrating excellence. In the front row, I could see Dean Chen, who had become a strong advocate for the reforms we'd implemented. Beside her sat Dr. Walsh from the awards committee, who had helped design new oversight procedures for nomination processes across the university system. The investigation that followed my award revealed systematic problems in how we identify and support promising research. We discovered that talented researchers were leaving our institution not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked advocates, not because their work wasn't excellent, but because their excellence wasn't being recognized by the people in positions to promote it. I clicked to my first slide, showing statistics that had shocked even me when we'd compiled them. In the 5 years prior to our investigation, our university lost 47 promising researchers to other institutions. When we interviewed these researchers, we found that 68% of them felt their work had been undervalued. 73% believed they'd been excluded from opportunities for advancement, and 81% said they'd received little or no support for pursuing external recognition. A murmur ran through the audience. These weren't just numbers, they represented careers that had been stunted and innovations that had been lost. But here's what we've learned in the 6 months since implementing new recognition and support systems. When researchers feel valued and supported, they don't just stay, they thrive. I clicked to the next slide. Showing the dramatic improvements we'd seen since the changes were implemented. This year, our university has received more award nominations than in the previous 3 years combined. Our retention rate for promising researchers has increased by 45%, and perhaps most importantly, we've seen a significant increase in collaborative research projects, as faculty members feel more confident that their contributions will be recognized and valued. After my presentation, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Kim, the researcher who'd left our department the previous year for a position at Stanford. She'd returned for the symposium to share her own experience with systemic barriers to recognition. "Maya," she said, "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. When I left last year, I felt like I was giving up on my dreams. Now I'm considering coming back because I know the environment has changed. Sarah, your experience was part of what motivated these changes. You shouldn't have had to leave to find support for your work." What happened to Dr. Blackwood? I heard he'd been removed as department head. Richard was reassigned to a research-only position. He's actually doing good work now that he's focused on science rather than politics. Sometimes people need to be removed from positions where they can damage others before they can find their way back to what they do best. The symposium continued for 2 days, with presentations on best practices for mentorship, bias recognition in evaluation processes, and systems for ensuring equitable access to opportunities. But for me, the most meaningful moment came during a panel discussion on overcoming barriers to recognition. A graduate student in the audience raised her hand and asked, "Dr. Patel, how do you maintain confidence in your work when people in authority positions tell you that you're not qualified or ready?" I thought about my own journey, about the months of self-doubt that had followed Richard's dismissal of my qualifications, about the moment when my name was called for an award I'd been told I didn't deserve. "The most important thing I learned," I said, "is that other people's limitations in recognizing excellence don't reflect limitations in your ability to achieve it." When someone tells you that you're not qualified, ask yourself, are they basing that assessment on your work, or on their assumptions about who deserves recognition? But what if they're in a position to control your opportunities? Then you find other ways to demonstrate your value. You build relationships with people who can see your potential. You document your achievements so thoroughly that they become impossible to dismiss. And you remember that recognition from the right people matters more than approval from the wrong people. After the symposium ended, I returned to my office to find a letter waiting on my desk. The return address showed it was from the National Science Foundation, and my heart rate increased as I opened it. "Dear Doctor, Patel, the letter began, "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive the NSF Early Career Development Award, recognizing your outstanding research contributions and your leadership in promoting inclusive excellence in scientific research." I stared at the letter, remembering Richard's words about needing more gravitas before I could be considered for major recognition. The NSF Career Award was one of the most prestigious honors available to young researchers. Recognizing not just scientific achievement, but leadership potential, my phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed it was my parents. "Beta," my mother said, her voice bright with excitement, "we just saw the news about your award on the university website." "Another award. We are so proud of you. Thank you, Mama. It's been quite a year. Your father wants to know if this means you're finally ready to get married and give us grandchildren." I laughed, feeling the familiar warmth of my parents' love and their complete inability to understand why anyone would choose research over family obligations. "Tell Papa that I'm still focused on my career right now. But maybe someday." He says, "That's what you said about the last award. And the one before that." As I hung up the phone, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I'd been a researcher whose qualifications were questioned by her own department head. Today, I was the director of a program that was changing how excellence was recognized and supported across an entire university system. The transformation hadn't just been in my own career, it had been in the understanding that excellence comes in many forms, from many backgrounds, and that our responsibility as leaders is to recognize and nurture that excellence wherever we find it. Richard Blackwood had told me I wasn't qualified for recognition. The scientific community had disagreed, not once, but repeatedly. But more importantly, I'd learned that the most meaningful qualification for leadership isn't the approval of people who want to limit your potential. It's the commitment to expanding potential for others. Tomorrow, I would return to my laboratory, where clinical trials of my gene therapy research were showing even more promising results. I would continue the work that had earned recognition despite the barriers placed in its path. But I would also continue the work of ensuring that future researchers wouldn't face those same barriers, that excellence would be recognized regardless of who achieved it or what form it took. The greatest qualification for leadership isn't proving you deserve recognition, it's ensuring that others receive the recognition they deserve.